Welcome to Griffonomics. Uh, Imagine inventing a permanent cure for a devastating disease, only to realize that, actually curing the patient might be the fastest way to bankrupt your company.
Yeah, it's a terrifying paradox, honestly.
Right. Well, I am so glad you could join us today because we are taking a deep dive into a massive stack of SEC filings, clinical trial readouts, and financial reports from a company that is quite literally trying to rewrite human biology.
And doing it at a really critical moment, too.
Exactly. Our mission for you today is to generate a granular strategic report and an investment roadmap of Intellia Therapeutics. We're looking at their incredibly ambitious transition from, a clinical stage research firm to a commercial genomic medicine powerhouse.
Yeah, and it is a fascinating transition to map out for you listening.
Yeah.
For some necessary context, Intellia is a true pioneer in what's called in vivo CRISPR gene editing.
And just to clarify that terminology for anyone newer to the space, in vivo means these therapies are delivered directly into the patient's body.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like, we are talking about the older methods where you have to, surgically extract a patient's cells, edit those cells in a sterile lab for weeks, and then infuse them back in.
Yeah, which is incredibly expensive and complex.
Totally. This is much more straightforward on the surface, right? Just an IV infusion designed to permanently modify your DNA right at the source of the disease.
That is the ultimate goal. I mean, it's an elegant concept in theory, but as the filings we're reviewing today show in stark detail, executing that vision at commercial scale involves navigating just a staggering amount of clinical, financial, and regulatory complexity.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand the business model, we have to start with the actual science. Without the breakthrough data, there is no business to analyze.
Absolutely not.
And on April 27, 2026, Intellia dropped some data that genuinely sent shockwaves through the medical community.
They absolutely did. I mean,
Well,
we're talking about the landmark Phase 3 HAELO trial data for their drug candidate, Lonvozo.
right, which targets hereditary angioedema.
Yeah, or HAE for short. It's a rare genetic condition that causes severe, unpredictable, and sometimes life-threatening swelling attacks across the body.
Which sounds awful.
It is. And the standard of care historically has just been chronic symptom management. So, patients essentially live in fear of the next attack.
But the HALO data completely rewrites that narrative. Like, the numbers in this readout are just wild.
Oh, completely unprecedented.
They reported an 87% reduction in monthly HAE attack rates compared to a placebo. But the statistic that really stopped me in my tracks, a remarkable 62% of patients treated with Lonvos became entirely attack-free.
Yeah, attack-free.
And they were completely free of any ongoing prophylactic therapy.
It is a profound paradigm shift. And the mechanism is what makes those numbers possible. You see, Lonvozo works by permanently inactivating a specific gene in the liver called the KLKB1 gene.
Okay, the KLKB1 gene?
Right. And by turning that specific gene off, the biological pathway that produces the proteins responsible for the swelling is simply shut down.
Mm.
What's fascinating here is the economic concept we can derive from this biological mechanism, which I like to call the functional cure moat.
I love that term. So how does a biological edit translate into an economic moat?
Well, from a strategic investment perspective, a functional cure creates the ultimate switching cost.
Right, because you don't need to switch if you're cured.
Exactly. Once a patient receives this single IV infusion and the genetic edit is made, they are cured or, functionally cured. That means they are permanently removed from the competitor's addressable market.
Oh, I see. So current chronic therapies are basically like renting your health forever. You have to pay every month or take a drug twice a week just to keep the swelling attacks away.
Yeah, exactly.
But Intellia's therapy is like buying the house outright. It's a one-time fix.
Precisely. You aren't competing for an annual prescription renewal anymore. Intellia captures the lifetime value of that patient in a single commercial event.
Wow.
And the commercial timeline to execute this strategy is moving aggressively fast. Intellia has already initiated a rolling biologics license application, or BLA submission with the FDA.
And they're targeting early next year, right?
Yeah, they are actively targeting a U.S. commercial launch in the first half of 2027.
Which brings up a very practical problem. Launching a world-first genetic cure requires a continuously running massive financial engine. I mean, to build the house, you need cash.
You definitely do.
So how does Intellia actually stay afloat while they wait for that 2027 launch window?
Well, looking closely at their 2025 financial review, we can see their liquidity position. Intellia ended the year with $605.1 million.
Okay, over 600 million.
Right. That is in cash, cash equivalents, and marketable securities. And management projects that this war chest provides a cash runway to fund their operations into the second half of 2027.
Okay, so that gets them past the projected launch date. But I noticed something glaring in the revenue structure. Right now, Intellia has 0% recurring revenue.
Correct. None. Their revenue is 100% reliant on project contingent collaboration payments.
But wait, the filings show they recognized $23 million in revenue in the fourth quarter of 2025. Where is that coming from if they have, like, zero commercial product sales?
Right, so that $23 million is essentially milestone money and cost reimbursements. A large chunk of it came from their partner, Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, reimbursing them for R&D costs.
Oh, okay.
And another portion was revenue recognized simply because a contract with a different partner, Sparing Vision, was terminated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is not sustainable, predictable commercial cash flow. It is highly contingent income.
That feels incredibly precarious, and it highlights a massive dynamic in these filings, the Regeneron reliance. How deep does that partnership actually go?
It is a profound strategic and financial reliance. Regeneron shares approximately 25% of the worldwide development costs and commercial profits for Intellia's other major pipeline program, NECTI.
And NEXI is the drug targeting ATTR amyloidosis, right?
Yes, exactly. Furthermore, Regeneron holds an option to co-promote that drug in the U.S. market. They are fundamentally Intellia's financial anchor right now.
Wait, so if Regeneron decides to shift its strategic focus to its own internal pipeline or disputes funding, Intellia is essentially left holding the bag.
Yeah, that is a critical vulnerability that is explicitly outlined in their SEC risk factors.
Really?
Oh, yeah. If that collaboration were to be altered, delayed, or terminated, Intellia would lose vital funding, development capabilities, and intellectual property access. It would severely harm their financial trajectory.
So they really need Regeneron.
They are effectively tethered to Regeneron's strategic goodwill to make it to 2027.
So we have a situation where their financial runway is heavily propped up by a single corporate partner. But, even if the money flows perfectly, a single biological misstep could blow the whole thing up.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about the regulatory landmines.
We saw exactly how fast a biological misstep can halt progress. We have to discuss the clinical holds placed by the FDA on Intellia's Phase 3 Magnitude and Magnitude 2 trials back in October of 2025.
Right.
And just to remind you listening, these are the trials for NEXI, the ATTR amyloidosis drug we just discussed.
Yeah, I read the notes on this, and it is a stark reminder of the stakes involved in permanently altering human DNA. A patient in the trial experienced grade 4 liver transaminases.
Yes.
And for you listening, that basically means severe acute liver toxicity. And tragically, this patient ended up dying.
It was incredibly tragic.
Now, the filings attribute the actual cause of death to septic shock from a perforated ulcer, but the liver toxicity event triggered an immediate hard halt from the FDA.
It did. And it's vital to understand why the liver is the flashpoint here. When you inject an in vivo CRISPR therapy into the bloodstream, the body's natural filtration system kicks in.
So it all goes to the liver.
Exactly. The liver's job is to clear complex lipids and foreign materials from the blood. So a massive concentration of the therapy naturally accumulates in the liver.
Which is fine if that's the target.
Right. If you are targeting a liver gene, that is a convenient feature. But it also means the liver cells are bearing the brunt of the metabolic stress.
That makes perfect sense. The liver is basically catching all the heavy machinery. So how did Intellia get the trials restarted?
Well, the FDA did eventually lift the hold on the Magnitude 2 trial in January 2026, and then the larger Magnitude trial in March 2026.
But I'm guessing not without conditions.
Far from it. It came with rigorous strings attached. Intellia had to agree to enhanced liver monitoring, specific guidance for administering short-term steroid treatments if liver enzymes spike, and much stricter exclusion criteria for enrolling patients with pre-existing conditions.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you read the transcripts from the earnings calls following the FDA holds, management took a very defensive tone regarding the safety profile.
They really did.
Yeah, Intellia's CEO, John Leonard, was pushed by analysts, and he actually admitted that they really don't know the exact molecular mechanisms causing this liver toxicity.
And that admission highlights the double-edged sword of in vivo CRISPR. The permanence of the edit is the main selling point, the functional cure moat we talked about.
Right.
But it is also the greatest biological risk. If you do not fully understand the exact molecular mechanism causing a severe adverse event, it is incredibly difficult to engineer a guarantee that it won't happen again.
And unlike taking a pill where you can just stop swallowing it if you feel sick, you cannot hit undo on a genetic edit.
Never.
If an unforeseen safety issue surfaces 3 years down the line, say a delayed immunological reaction or an off-target edit that promotes cancer, the edit is permanent.
Which is why the FDA mandates a 15-year safety follow-up for these patients. The biological risks are long tail. But the SEC filings also dedicate significant space to another, much more immediate vulnerability, which is manufacturing.
Oh, right.
Specifically chemistry manufacturing and controls, or CMC.
I was hoping we would get to this because we need to talk about how you actually mass produce a genetic edit. I assume it's significantly harder than pressing standard chemical compounds into a pill.
Exponentially harder. Intellia relies entirely on third-party contract manufacturing organizations, or CMOs, to produce commercial-scale validated material.
Okay.
And in vivo, CRISPR therapies, relying on incredibly complex delivery vehicles, particularly lipid nanoparticles, or LNPs.
Right. So to visualize this, the LNP is basically a microscopic Trojan horse. You can't just inject raw CRISPR scissors into the blood. The immune system would destroy them instantly.
Right. It would see them as an immediate threat.
So the LNP encases the CRISPR machinery, sneaks it past the body's defenses, docks with the target cell, and drops the genetic payload inside to do its work.
That is an excellent analogy. But manufacturing millions of perfectly uniform microscopic Trojan horses is a logistical nightmare.
I can imagine.
The physical and chemical properties of LNPs are incredibly sensitive. You're dealing with precise ratios of highly volatile lipids, intense temperature sensitivities, and complex mixing techniques.
So it's not just mixing powder in a giant vat.
Not at all. The filings warn that because these therapies are so novel, they can't always be fully characterized by standard quality control tests. Even microscopic deviations in the manufacturing process by these third-party CMOs,
Like what?
like a slight temperature fluctuation or a pressure variance, those can cause catastrophic lot failures.
Meaning that even if the underlying science of the drug is flawless, a tiny mechanical error in a third-party factory could completely derail their 2027 commercial launch.
Exactly. It is an incredibly fragile supply chain supporting a revolutionary science.
So their manufacturing line is basically balancing on a knife's edge. But let's assume they execute it perfectly. They synthesize the drug, they pass the FDA inspections, and they step out of the lab. The filings show they are walking straight into a battlefield of hostile lawyers, aggressive competitors, and government pricing caps. Let's talk about the intellectual property warfare first.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the competitive landscape is where Intellia's viability is truly tested. Let's look at the patents.
Yeah.
Intellia's foundational CRISPR-Cas9 IP, the very patents that grant them the right to utilize this technology, are locked in bitter, multi-year patent interferences.
The filings list massive institutions, too. They are fighting the Broad Institute, Toolgen, and Sigma Aldrich over who actually has the priority rights to the invention of CRISPR in eukaryotic cells.
It is a massive legal tangle.
It really is. And it's not just the foundational patents. Just recently, in July 2024, a company called Blue Allele filed a targeted patent infringement lawsuit against Intellia, specifically over their bidirectional insertion template technology.
Right.
What happens if Intellia loses these battles?
The consequences could be devastating to their business model.
Right.
They could be forced to pay treble damages for willful infringement. Yeah. They might face heavy, ongoing royalty burdens that absolutely crush their profit margins. Or, in the worst-case scenario, they could endure court injunctions that block them from selling their products entirely. Their technological moat is completely surrounded by litigation.
And while the lawyers are fighting in court, Intellia's competitors are advancing in the clinic. Intellia isn't operating in a vacuum here. They are going up against massive, well-capitalized players like Alnylam, BridgeBio, Pfizer, and Takeda.
Yes, and these competitors are actively attacking Intellia's one-and-done narrative with a very compelling counteroffer, which is RNA silencing therapies.
I want to make sure we clearly distinguish this for you listening. I know we established that CRISPR is permanently snipping and editing the DNA. How is RNA silencing fundamentally different, and why would a competitor use that against Intellia?
Think of it this way. DNA is the original master blueprint locked inside the cell's nucleus. RNA is a temporary messenger that carries a copy of that blueprint out to the factory floor to build a protein.
Okay, got it.
So CRISPR goes into the nucleus and permanently crosses out a line in the master blueprint. RNA silencing doesn't touch the master blueprint at all. It simply intercepts and destroys the temporary messenger before the protein can be built.
So if there is an error or a side effect, RNA silencing is reversible. You just stop taking the drug, the messenger stops getting intercepted, and the body goes back to normal.
Exactly.
But with CRISPR, if you cross out the wrong line in the master blueprint, you can't buy a new blueprint.
Right, and competitors only require a patient to take a dose every 6 months. They are leveraging the safety uncertainties of CRISPR, like the unknown mechanisms behind the liver toxicity event we discussed, to argue that reversible RNA therapies are a much safer choice.
That makes a lot of sense from a patient perspective.
It does. They offer excellent disease management without the existential risks of permanently altering human DNA. It completely challenges Intellia's core value proposition to hesitant patients and cautious physicians.
That is a very powerful counter-narrative. But let's say a patient and their doctor evaluate the risks, they want the permanent cure, and Intellia delivers it perfectly.
Yeah.
Intellia still has to get paid. And the pricing landscape for one-time curative therapies right now looks brutally hostile in these filings.
It is historically hostile. The economic model for a gene therapy requires an ultra-high upfront cost, often ranging into the millions of dollars. The justification is that you are replacing decades of expensive chronic treatment costs.
Right.
But third-party payers fundamentally balk at these massive lump sums.
And it isn't just private insurance companies pushing back. The SEC filings explicitly call out massive regulatory headwinds from the U.S. government. They specifically highlight the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and newly proposed Medicare pricing models known as GLOBE for Part B drugs and GUARD for Part D drugs.
Yeah, as detailed in the source material, these government models aim to enforce what is known as most favored nation international benchmark pricing. And they also include mechanisms for mandatory rebates. Now, the stated goal of these policies is cost containment for the healthcare system, but for a company like Intellia, they act as a hard, non-negotiable ceiling on revenue. These models exert massive downward pressure on net prices.
It's like inventing a teleportation device, but the government steps in and forces you to charge the exact same price as a crosstown bus ticket.
That's a great way to put it.
The math just doesn't work. If Intellia spends billions of dollars on research and development over a decade to create a permanent genetic cure, but they are legally mandated to accept heavily rebated prices benchmarked to countries with entirely different socialized healthcare systems, it threatens the net profitability of the entire endeavor.
It is a systemic risk to their business model. And as you listening should note, the filings make it clear the company is completely impartial to the political intent of these laws. They are simply reporting them as severe material financial threats to their ability to achieve commercial profitability.
So what does this all mean? We have groundbreaking, unprecedented science. We have a ticking financial clock tethered to a single corporate partner. We have severe regulatory hurdles, complex manufacturing bottlenecks, and a hostile pricing gauntlet. Where does this leave you, the listener, trying to map out this company's future?
Well, the clinical catalyst verdict here is that Intellia's strategic outlook must be rated as high reward, but with binary risk.
Binary meaning it either succeeds spectacularly and changes medicine forever, or it hits a wall and fails completely.
Correct. The clinical efficacy, particularly that HAELO data showing 62% of patients becoming completely attack-free, is completely unprecedented. The potential upside for patients and stakeholders is massive.
But the risks are just as big.
Exactly. The margin of safety is exceptionally narrow. The high cash burn, the reliance on third-party manufacturers, the unknown safety mechanisms of their biological edits, and the intent surrounding IP litigation mean that any single failure point could be catastrophic to the company.
And for you listening, whether you are an investor building a roadmap, a researcher analyzing the space, or just someone fascinated by the sheer scale of human innovation, this is exactly why you should care. Intellia is the ultimate test case for the future of genomic medicine.
They really are.
They are proving that solving the biological puzzle, actually curing a genetic disease at the DNA level, is only half the battle. Surviving the economic, legal, and manufacturing gauntlet is the rest of the war.
It is a perfect encapsulation of the modern biotech landscape. The science is moving significantly faster than the economic and regulatory infrastructure can support it.
Which leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. If government pricing caps, like the proposed GLOBE and GUARD models, effectively make it financially ruinous for a company to invent, manufacture, and commercialize a permanent genetic cure, will pharmaceutical companies eventually just stop trying to cure diseases and go back to simply managing symptoms forever?
It's a scary thought.
It's a critical question of whether our modern economic models can actually sustain our greatest scientific breakthroughs.
It is arguably the defining question for the next decade of genomic medicine.
Risk defined, portfolio protected.